The most widely published book in human history reveals that we are created in the image of God. Throughout our human journey, each encounter is an opportunity to see the shared humanity in ourselves and others. Regardless of one's views on religion, each experience and each story weaves us together towards a common path. A path of transformation, a process of growth and understanding, a recognition that, at our core, we share a common destiny. What does the search for truth really mean in our lives? How can we find a sense of unity in a world so diverse and divided? As we reflect on these questions, we start to uncover a fundamental connection that binds us all beyond our differences. Welcome to Created in the Image of God, Building Vibrant Communities, with our host, Wade Franson. Today's episode is Breaking the Power of the Mask.
Hey everyone, it's Wade Franson back with another episode of Created in the Image of God. We're into the 250 numbers now. Been doing this for 3 years and we keep getting ever more interesting, fascinating, engaged, and successful people. Today we have Reverend Jocelyn Jones, and she is an author, an ordained minister, and the founder of a counseling ministry that's national in nature. And she has a top-rated Christian podcast. She focuses both on trauma and healing, and also on women, equipping them to overcome that trauma and serve in ministry with freedom. She is the author of Breaking the Power of the Mask and is a Master Facilitator with the Trauma Healing Institute. She has degrees in social work and theological studies. In short, a very well-rounded person applying all of these skills, talents, and training to serving others. Welcome to the show, Reverend Jones.
Wade, thank you so much for having me. It's an honor.
And may I call you Jocelyn throughout the show?
Please do. We're friends.
Awesome. Well, we've been planning this show for some time, and we've shared, what each of us is doing and how exciting it is. We're working in the same field, broadly speaking, different aspects of it, all with the goal of helping us understand that we are created in the image of God, to use my podcast title, and building vibrant communities, helping people truly connect and relate to each other in a positive way under the banner of God's love and forgiveness. Sorry to sort of contextualize it, but I'm just inspired after talking to you about how much we have in common here. So I'd like to understand more deeply. I know a little bit, and I know the audience would. What were the forces that shaped you? Who were your parents? Were you born in the Chicago area? Have you always lived there? And what was that like growing up? And how did you find your path?
Great question, Wade. Well, I am the daughter of James and Marion Jones, two loving parents. My mom was stay-at-home since I was 2 years old, and they wanted to make sure we had the best education, so they sent us to Catholic school. And at first, we weren't considered Catholic, but my mom wanted to make sure that we weren't left out. Sometimes it was one of those things in Catholic schools, if you weren't of that denomination, you had to sit out on things. And so she decided to convert to Catholicism and brought us to church. And she would bring us to church, and I'm gonna be honest, I would be bored. I'd be so bored out of my mind. And I would go through a lot of the rituals, and it was very religious to me as a kid. Like, funny story, I remember going to confession one day and I didn't know what to talk about, so I just made stuff up. I'm like, I'm gonna confess this. It was just religion, right? And so it wasn't until I was at a Kairos retreat in high school, and that's when I had a encounter with God. That was like my first moment where it was like, wait a minute, this is not just like you genuflect and do the rituals. There's something here. So that was my first encounter in terms of really understanding that this faith thing is important. And it wasn't until I went off to college, made some major mistakes, Wade, that I realized, okay, something needs to change. And I felt like I was in a broken season, and a friend invited me to a small women's group Bible study. And we watched on VHS a video called No More Sheets by Juanita Bynum. And that video was so powerful. She was talking about soul ties and sexual trauma. And that had me on my face doing the ugly cry. And that's when I, in a living room, really gave my life to Christ and said, okay, I want to do something different. I don't want to, walk this wide path. What does this narrow path look like? And I started getting connected to Campus Crusade and trying to find a church. And, I still struggled in undergrad, like many of us do, but that was really the beginning of my journey.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. I just, in the last few days, interviewed a gentleman who he had a book out where Kairos was in the title, and then there was a subtitle. And I said, what exactly does that word mean? And what he said was, Kairos describes those moments where God engages and transforms something. And it's interesting that you were on a Kairos retreat when you had that experience.
It was definitely a seed planted, and I think when you have those seeds planted, even when you're young, it will grow when you have the right people around you.
Yeah, and then you mentioned college, where many of us make mistakes, right? It's you got those wings now, you're jumping out of the nest, and the first thing you do is kind of fall to the ground, right?
Yeah. Oh, I felt all
And
right.
the joke about you know, teenagers is, they come back from college and it's amazing how much their parents learned in the 4 years they were away.
Yes. That's so good.
So when you got involved with Campus Crusade, is that a denominational thing, non-denominational, going from having converted to Catholicism to be part of the community, which I love that part of the story. But then finding your way amidst these various denominational distinctions. Tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah. At the time, I didn't even fully understand like all the different denominations outside of Catholicism. So I don't recall if there was a denomination associated with Campus Crusade. I believe there might be, but at the time it didn't matter. It's like, okay, you understand Jesus, you know who Jesus Christ is. Okay, show me. And so for me, it was just a beautiful woman. Her name is Adrienne. I still remember her smile. Just allow me to just come to small groups and begin to explore, and then try to find a church that I could attend on campus. And, again, Wade, this was like that spotty season where I was seeking, but it was still so much temptation. I was partying. I was throwing parties on campus. I'm not going to lie, Wade. But I did have a thirst for Jesus. And so when I came home for the summer, I would attend church regularly, and then I would go back to school and party. But once I got out of undergrad, that's when I became really serious about my faith.
Yeah, I share a brief vignette about myself. I was baptized at age 19, full immersion. I had an experience at age 11, maybe similar to you. This was actually when I was in Sweden. I grew up completely non-religious. My parents weren't religious. When I was living with my aunt and uncle in Sweden, they were even less religious. And I think it was some neighbor that took me to something, and I was moved, and I gave my heart to Jesus at age like 10 or 11. And then, and then later, my dad had gotten involved in this very zealous religious organization. They had this set of self-produced Bible stories with this famous illustrator, Basil Wolverton, who also did illustrations for Mad Magazine and back of comic books. He was like this really bizarre illustrator. But then he had this, I didn't even know he had this religious side, and he'd done all these illustrations for the Bible story. They were incredibly graphic, and really compelling to this young kid. And I started reading those Bible stories, but still the circumstances of my life, I was in so much trouble, starting in grade 7. And when I was 19, even after I was baptized, I was in a high-speed chase in Alaska, and I was the object of that chase, the state troopers pursuing me, and I ran off the road at 100 miles an hour. And I then, when I got out of jail, I realized I got to turn my life around. So I went to college in California to study theology, religion, not because I wanted to be a minister or anything like that. I said, I need to get out of this mess. I'm going to die. I'm going to kill myself. I couldn't stop this stuff I was doing. So, there is that phase and that age, given our circumstances, that many, many people go through. And it's so encouraging to hear these stories of people, 2 steps forward, 1 step back. But I remember almost visually, trying to find things to get closer to God and move away from Satan, where they were very real in my head. And the more time I would spend, I joined church choir to spend more time with the church. I joined a speaking club with the men, to spend more time with church stuff, just to get away from all the other stuff.
I can
But
relate
it's
to that.
a journey and a progression.
For sure, for sure. And it's a process, one in which we don't want to look at ourselves from a place of judgment. And eventually, once I got in the right environment, I worked in television for about 1.5 years, and I was offered an opportunity for promotion at the television company, but I also had connected to a church that I really loved, and I was so involved there, and God just didn't give me peace about accepting the promotion. I couldn't understand why I didn't want to accept it. But the reason was because God actually had a position for me at my church that was about to open up. And so I transitioned from television at the age of 23 to working in full-time ministry. And at 23, ever since then, I've been in full-time ministry.
Wow. So one last kind of comment as we're talking about this. You and I shared briefly as we were preparing for this show around the whole idea of throughout history, religious people have been judging others and even condemning them to hell over doctrinal differences. I learned a few months ago that there are actually 40,000 different Christian denominations. I was shocked at that number, right? But by researchers who define this is how the body of Christ splinters and splinters and splinters and splinters over these differences. Now, that's not to say they're not united under Christ, right? But traditionally, they've even been condemning each other to hell. They've been declaring the others to not be at all Christian. So because of what? Well, and, I mentioned that the statement in the Bible is that Satan is the accuser of the brethren, right? And God offers forgiveness, and he sends rain on the just and unjust alike. And it's up to him to determine what each of us needs in our journey, whether that's love, mercy, correction. It says he chastens every son whom he loves. I assume that applies to daughters as well, but maybe he's a little gentler. I don't know. But the point is, we're kind of all moving away from that as a world today. Would you agree? Would you say it's not necessarily that everyone has to believe exactly the same thing, but this idea of tolerance, coexistence is seeming to even permeate within religions? And for me, as you were talking, I was thinking this woman you met that you said you still remember her smile. What was her name? Adrian. She exemplified what I call the sign of a true Christian, which is John 13:35. By this shall all men know that you are my disciples, that you have love one for another. So as we exemplify that love, we attract their hearts to God, to the church, to Jesus, and to the message, because we see that love.
100%.
And we can't see or perceive that love when that person is judgmental against these people or those people or that other denomination, or even those people outside the church, or even these people politically that we disagree with. We don't have to agree, we don't have to support. But to me, it's kind of like the minute you start being anti anything, you're no longer really for God.
Yeah, I sometimes it makes me sad. I wonder, like, how God is just looking at his children and be like, really? You're arguing over this, you're splitting over this. Like, some of the stuff that divides us makes no sense, and it becomes, again, religion versus relationship, and so I do think that the church has some areas to grow in. I love the church. I know God loves the church, but there's sometimes I feel like we have the wrong focus.
Well, we're going to go to a quick commercial break, which will illustrate what your focus is today. And then when we come back right after this break, we're going to talk about that focus, talk about your life's work, talk about what you've been doing since the age of 23 when you went full-time in the ministry. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Reverend Jocelyn Jones on Created in the Image of God.
You feel called to ministry, but the path forward feels unclear. Fear, doubt, and uncertainty can make the calling feel overwhelming, especially when trying to build something meaningful alone. Written from real ministry experience, this book was created to help women start, grow, and sustain a transformative ministry beyond the walls of the church. Inside are practical strategies for overcoming fear, gaining clarity, building services and teams, generating revenue, and creating a 90-day action plan for growth. More than inspiration, this book is a roadmap for turning a calling into something real and impactful. Sisters, Start Your Ministry, a guide to start, grow, and sustain a transformative ministry. Available on Amazon.
Welcome back to Created in the Image of God. When we left, we had just wrapped up that first segment, the backstory for Jocelyn. And now let's talk about her life's work in the ministry from the age of 23. So you now turned down that promotion in the media world, the TV world, to focus on service to God, to Jesus, to the church. Tell us about that. Unpack it for us, and how did that unfold?
Yeah, so they had a position at their youth center to work as a violence prevention manager, and it allowed me to work with young people to help them to navigate what was going on around the violence in Chicago South Side. And so I loved working with the youth, but it was also really sad because the violence was real. I'll never forget, I was having a conversation with a young girl named Ashley, and she had just lost someone to gun violence. And she had like this stoic face expression. And I looked at her, I said, Ashley, it's okay for you to cry. And she said, Miss Jocelyn, if I cried every time I lost someone to gun violence, I would be crying all the time. And I was like, oh my goodness, what do I even do with this? And I didn't realize that this would become later a passion for me around trauma healing, because I didn't have language to describe what Ashley was going with, and I didn't know how to help her. But I started equipping myself, going to school to get my master's in social work, and then later on master's in theology. And I took all these classes on pastoral care. I just loved caring for the brokenhearted. And I ended up serving at my church for over a decade, becoming the executive director of their nonprofit. But eventually, Wade, I felt like God was calling me beyond the church walls in a different way. And I wanted to help people to experience healing. I just didn't quite know how. And so my ministry that I have today actually started off as a blog. In 2018, I started writing testimonies every Friday. I called it Faith Fridays, about how God helped people to navigate some of the most difficult times in their life: divorce, abuse, car accidents, being paralyzed. I would just write stories. And it was so sacred to me to hear, how people navigated those situations and how their faith is what kept them. And those blogs are still out there on the internet today. But as time progressed, I was introduced to an organization called the Trauma Healing Institute. And it had this experience where it combined the Bible, which is my core, and it also included mental health practices to lead the small group Bible study experience to help people to heal from trauma. And when I went through this curriculum, I'm like, this combines both my worlds, social work and theology. And it allows for me to lead people through this faith-based trauma healing experience. And I went through that in March of 2020. And you remember what was happening in March of 2020. The world was shutting down for COVID.
Yep.
And I got certified. And
the world was about to go through one of the biggest collective traumas in our history.
Exactly. And so I literally took that in-person class. The world shut down. And then I had to say, okay, well, what do I do? Because people are experiencing trauma. And I started running these groups on Zoom with some friends. And then I continued to run the groups. And eventually I started running groups on a national level. And I transitioned from my full-time job at my church to do this full-time. And I started a Christian counseling division as well, to do Christian trauma counseling. And all of this was done virtually. And so I was able to really do the work that my heart yearned for, which was helping people heal from trauma through a faith-based lens.
Amazing. And so tell us about how the challenges and perhaps the opportunities that happened when you launched that at the beginning of COVID.
Yeah, so I'll start with the opportunities first. The opportunity was that people became open to telehealth and doing things virtually. Prior to COVID, the trauma healing groups were really only done in person. But I had to learn how to do it virtually. And then that allowed for me to bring people together from across the country. And like, I think we had some people outside of the country to do our trauma healing groups. And so that was the great opportunity. The challenge was that sometimes you just want to hug people and you want to be able to be in the same space. And so that human touch was lost for a while, but I was still able to recreate the connection because the Holy Spirit can still move through Zoom. And I had to learn, that was still powerful breakthroughs taking place through the work that we were doing.
Awesome. So tell me a little bit about the intersection, because I'm pro science generally, but then I'm not necessarily always pro social science, because social science often, to me, tries to find ways to approve behaviors that are not acceptable in God's sight. It's interesting. Let's take AI, for example. There's now discussion about what AI does and doesn't do. And I just recently interviewed somebody who said, well, in this, when they're working with developing Claude, they actually Claude, Claude, if anybody knows what that one is. They brought in a large number of faith-based persons to help them in the education of Claude to make sure that it had some of this in there. Whereas if you don't do that, the artificial intelligence that you create can have inherent biases against God, against spiritual things. So that was fascinating to me. So how does that Bible-based trauma healing differ from what might be happening outside that context?
Yeah, so one of the things that the curriculum does is it draws in scriptures and stories. So for example, grief. Grief is something that we have curriculum on through this, and it's something where grief and trauma have a intersection. Anytime you experience trauma, there's grief surrounding that trauma. There's some type of loss. And so we deal with that. And we use the story of Job. He's the poster boy of loss.
If you can imagine the trauma, it happened to him.
That man experienced so much trauma and loss at the same time. And so in that, we draw from that story and some of the lessons. We talk about the miserable comforters, his friends who showed up and tried giving advice, miserable comforters. And so from that, we include stories. We have moments where we have like different scriptures that we pull from. That's the biblical side. But then we also have things where we teach, like, these are signs of trauma. So like we pull out like, okay, what is trauma? And then looking at the fact that trauma is the effects of emotional shock that it leaves you feeling horror, helplessness, intense fear. But then how does the behavior show up? And we talk about like the signs of trauma, because sometimes in the church, we might, look at someone and be like, they got a demon in them. Okay. All right. Maybe they're actually experiencing trauma symptoms. Maybe there's something happening from a mental health standpoint. And so being able to recognize that, and sometimes I believe in the power of prayer, and in some cases, people need a deeper level of care. And so this provides lay leaders with what I like to call like trauma first aid training. because you're not going to walk away through this training as a therapist. Please don't even try. But it's going to give you a baseline understanding of how to hold safe space for people so you don't cause harm. Because one of the things I try to teach church leaders is that to become a trauma healing church, we want to be able to recognize and respond to trauma in a way that repairs and does not re-traumatize. And in order for us to not re-traumatize, we need to have a baseline understanding, and we need to have certain techniques to be able to hold a space for people in a safe way, hold their sacred stories, and connect them to support. And so through this curriculum, we give them the baseline training, showing them that you can integrate your faith, but you also want to have some basic understanding from a mental health standpoint of what's going on so you can provide care and then be able to refer people to additional support.
Yeah, I'm reflecting on certain Bible verses, such as the one where it says, if you tell somebody be warmed and filled, but you don't give them a blanket or you don't give them a meal, there's no point in it. So just talking about, well, we'll pray for you. Yes, we should be praying for them, and ultimately God will give that. But then there's a balance, right? There's a balance between what God would expect us to do for ourselves. But I want to go off in a slightly different tangent here for a moment, because also in the Bible, and this is where, again, some differences between modern social science, especially as applied in certain circumstances, and the Bible differ. It says that Jesus, this is kind of a strange scripture, one that I reflect on often. It says that Jesus himself learned obedience through the things he suffered. And in the book of Hebrews, it says God chastens every son whom he loves. And so sometimes it's helpful, and again, not to be a miserable comforter, to stay far away from that, but somehow the realization that God must love you very much to have given you these circumstances, whatever they are, so that, for example, in your case, and I would point to myself as well, having gone through those things, having suffered, we have the ability to have a deeper empathy, a deeper support, a deeper connection. So God can ultimately make all things good.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to go big picture here. The opioid crisis. The opioid crisis, in my opinion, has many, many factors and many, many lessons. But one of the biggest ones is the medical industrial complex turned pain into an illness, and they treated the illness of pain. And they put a chart up on every hospital wall that said, rate your pain today on a scale of smiley face to 0 to 10. And if you said my pain is an 8 today, you would get the drugs.
Yeah.
Because the pain itself was suddenly the illness. The pain isn't the illness. But when we did that, then suddenly an opioid was the solution to the illness. We completely perverted the basic fabric of the universe. And then we created systems that fed into each other that addicted millions of people opioids, right? So there's a you talked about abandoning the wide path and following the straight and narrow. This is why I love the intersection of the Bible and trauma healing, the value of both sides, to find that straight and narrow, to walk that razor's edge, to not deviate to the left or to the right, to provide true, complete healing, which, to your point, is not easy, because we can easily go off on either side and be a miserable comforter or an enabler, right?
Yeah.
Versus actually providing the medicine along with the spoonful of sugar that helps it go down.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. And it's interesting that you are bringing up this conversation that we've been wrestling with since forever around God and suffering. And the one thing I like to always say is that in certain cases, it was not God who caused the suffering. I
Usually
don't
never,
believe
never does God cause the
like,
suffering.
right. Like some cases, yeah, it was one of those things where it's like, okay, this could be evil, this could be Satan. It could be because we're in a fallen world due to sin. It could be a number of things it could be our choices that caused us to be in a state of pain. But even when I've seen it in my life, when I've made a mistake, like you said, God is so good and merciful. He can allow for us to be able to redeem that story in a way where it can still be used for good. And so we do wrestle with that in our trauma healing groups around, we have a good God, but why do we suffer? And how do we navigate that?
Yeah. I just read an article where somebody is saying, looking at the Garden of Eden story, and what they were saying was that you could look at Adam and Eve and their shame and guilt as the same way that a 2-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 6-year-old, an 8-year-old, or maybe even a teenager going to college begins to feel shame and guilt when they sort of cast off the parental guidance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And go their own way. And,
Mm-hmm.
the Garden of Eden story frames that in a dramatic, full of symbolism kind of way, but it's the human experience that we all go through. We cause our own pain. We inflict pain on others.
Mm-hmm.
You know, yeah. So whether Satan is really acting, or whether he's a metaphor for the sort of aggregated evil of a lot of bad decisions, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
It's not God causing it. But
Yeah.
it is God giving us an opportunity to learn through the school of hard knocks,
Yeah.
our own and others.
For sure. And, in this work, it's one of those things, this is so beautiful. I'm grateful that I get to do this work full time, Wade, because one of the things I love to do is work with women in particular who feel called to start a healing ministry, and show them that they can reclaim their story. Like we want to work on them healing first, but then we can show them how to now walk with others. And over the years, I've expanded beyond just doing work in the trauma healing space for women. I've really enjoyed helping women to answer the call to ministry beyond the walls of the church. And for me, Wade, I don't put ministry in a box. Ministry is service that glorifies God. And that could be done in the Zoom room, that could be done in the boardroom, that could be done through a nonprofit. And so ministry is not confined to the walls of the church in a traditional ministry sense. And so I often work with women to help them to answer that call that God has given them to write that book, to maybe start speaking or coaching or create that domestic violence shelter, whatever that vision is. I want to help them to answer that and also learn how to sustain it, because that's one of the biggest challenges. You asked me about challenges earlier. I think the biggest challenge for me was figuring out how to enter into starting my own ministry -- business, faith-based business, and being able to sustain myself financially. I didn't know how I was going to generate revenue doing this work for God. How do you balance that? How do you price it? All these questions. And so I had to learn how to do ministry in the marketplace. And now I walk with sisters who they have the passion, they have the vision, but if they keep going down this path, paying for everything out of their pocket, they're not going to have any money to sustain it. So how do we navigate that? And so I have a program for helping women to do that and a book on that as well.
Amazing. Paul said you shouldn't muzzle the ox that treads out the grain, right? But there has to be some grain in order for that ox to survive, right? So let's this is actually the perfect segue into the next segment. We're going to go to a quick commercial break. When we come back, the question is, where are you growing next? You've already indicated, so we'll talk about that. We'll unpack it a little bit, and I have a couple of thoughts I'll share as well. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back with more of Dr. Reverend Jocelyn Jones. Reverend Jocelyn Jones on Created in the Image of God.
In a world where religions often talk past each other, what if we just sat down and listened? Facets of One is a simple devotional, bringing together scripture from the world's faiths, centered on one truth: God is one. From the Bible to the Quran, from Krishna to Christ, Each voice speaks in turn, without argument, without division. You don't have to agree on everything. Just be willing to pray, to listen, and to come together. If you're longing for something deeper than noise and division, this is a different kind of conversation. Facets of one, many voices, one God. Will you start a circle?
Welcome back to the concluding segment, sadly, but it's exciting, with Reverend Jocelyn Jones. Right before the break, she was explaining how she's transitioning from a strict focus on trauma and healing and doing that in conjunction with the Bible to empowering the next step for especially women who, having begun that recovery path or achieved a certain degree, can actually enhance and increase that healing and growth by turning their attention away from themselves onto serving and ministering to others. So tell us a little bit about that transition you're making and where it's going.
Oh man, it's been so fun to journey with women. I think that sometimes we have the story that we tell ourselves that God can't use me. I'm not qualified. I'm not ready. That story often holds us back. But when we think about Moses, when he had his call moment with the burning bush, he did not feel ready. He was like, I stutter. Like, do you know my past? Like, I'm not, get somebody else. Like, he just did not feel qualified. And I've learned, and I tell women this all the time, God does not choose the qualified, he qualifies the called. He is someone who he knows your resume, he knows your past, and he still has people who he's going to assign to you if you're willing to take up this call, that you can minister to who I can never minister to or reach. And so helping women to understand in our weakness, God's strength is made perfect. And if we just give it to him, he can use you in a mighty way to leave an imprint that leaves a legacy. And so helping women to move past the fear, move past the stories that they told themselves, and then journey with them to say, okay, let's take this idea that you have and let's put something on paper and let's make sure you're equipped. Let me do some trainings for you and let me show you, all right, this is how you make a plan. All right, this is how you do the fundraising. Okay, this is how you get people to know that you exist. And so helping them along that path, and then also helping them to be able to have something that's sustainable. And for some women, they have a goal to move from their job, their full-time job that they actually might not be fulfilled at, to shifting to do this work full time. And I want women to know that that is possible if we have the right strategy in place. And so for me, I wake up, no kidding, Wade, every day, thanking God that I get to journey with women to help them to heal and to help them answer the call.
Amazing. I'll share a little vignette from our world here. So viewers know that we established something called the Royal Falcon Foundation some time ago. We have a new book out that's doing quite well that focuses on this sort of building vibrant communities aspect from a spiritual perspective. But we have something that's being launched now. We've been working on it for a number of years. You can see videos on the website of what led to this, called the Soul Seeds program. What this is simply to take your concern, right? How do you make this sustainable? Because we were doing these camp programs for young people, but it was expensive to run and operate. You couldn't scale it because it took a lot of training and some capital and resources behind it in order for anyone to start such a thing. Even for us, it was very challenging to do it and then to make it pay for itself, because you can't charge people what it actually costs for this, especially the kind of thing we were doing. So we tried to do, how can you take some of the principles and put them in a little box and scale it? Well, taking principles of companion planting, which we started with, which is a spiritual lesson, and how even the roots communicate, the plants support each other. They need some space, but you plant the right ones with the right ones, all about building vibrant communities. And then we went into regenerative farming, soil transformation, sustainability, and helping people realize you can grow some of your own food and get the kids' hands off the phones and into the dirt to learn how to do this and then produce something and share it with others. Well, we put this all into this little box, and it's called Soul Seeds, where we can go and create a raised bed garden for a group and get them the soil, the materials, plant everything. But still, there's a cost involved. Well, guess what? We found a local credit union here that has actually 50 branches, very excited about supporting us with this and providing the funds. We connected with another person who can get us on radio to support it and can show us how to go to even some of the big box, Home Depot, Lowe's, or some regional ones here, Menards or Farm and Fleet, get them to actually donate the materials as part of this. And there are so putting this together, we now have this where it's fully funded. All it takes is somebody to say, oh, I love that program. We have a church youth group, or we have the boys club, or Boy Scouts or Girl Scouts or whatever, and we have a place. Oh, and we found here that there was this low-income housing development where they said, yes, we'll provide a space for you to do this because we'd love to have that here. And some kids from that low-income area went and did it. They produced from one couple of little raised beds over 500 tomatoes, and they were so proud to take them in bowls and take them to the food pantry and just put them out for guests to take. I'm so excited for having done this, right? So there are this is just one example, many ways. So didn't mean to dominate here, but I'm just excited because this is current with us. Tell us how, you mentioned you also have some materials and some approaches that you can use to teach these women these principles of sustainability and economic viability.
Yeah. So one easy resource that women can grab hold of is my new book, Sister Start Your Ministry. It's for women.
Love that title.
To help them. Yeah, sister, come on, it's time. And again, ministry for me is ministry beyond the walls. So it could be your faith-based business. It could be a nonprofit, whatever that is. And so in that book, I talk about how to first know your why you're starting it. And in helping women to move past fear, we deal with that. Then I want to help women to discern, because one of my biggest struggles initially was, okay, I know I'm called, but called to what? And how does this look? What do I do? Okay, now I know I'm called to help domestic violence survivors, but all right, how do I equip myself for this? Do I get a certification? Do I go back to school? Do I study online? Okay, I'm equipped. I've had all the degrees, but okay, now I need a plan. How do I do the plan? What's my mission statement? How do I get the funding? How do I market this? Yes, you do have to market your ministry. Okay, how do I do that? Okay, I'm so busy. I'm a mom. I'm busy in church. How do I set my schedule? We deal with all of that in this book, Sister Start Your Ministry. And so that's something that I would tell people to get. And I have a free resource guide. It's a ministry launch starter kit for women as well that they can grab to accompany them as they're going through this. And that's available at sisterstartyourministry.com. You can get the book and the free gift.
Awesome. So they can get the book and the free gift at sisterstartyourministry.com, one word. And is this book also available on Amazon, or if we went into Barnes & Nobles, we could order it?
Yeah, it's available at Amazon, not Barnes & Nobles yet, but right. Everything that they need is at sisterstartyourministry.com.
Well, you and I should talk, because we can help you with the promotion of that and maybe make some steps there, as you and I talked about before the show. So you and I will have to connect, because I'd love to do more to promote this for you and work with you on that side as well. So south side of Chicago, that's still your focus area? Is that still where you live, or have you expanded beyond that? Obviously, you can access the website anywhere.
Yeah, so I still live in the Chicagoland area, a suburb outside of Chicago, but my work is national. So I travel, I teach the women. I have a community of women who I support and I coach, and they're from all over the country.
Wonderful. Not a whole lot of time left. Is there one in particular, one sister that you want to highlight of something that she's done here in the time remaining, to, the kind of thing that they're focused on?
Yeah, so just this year I hosted a annual ministry launch conference, and this one sister joined our community just less than 90 days ago. And after attending the conference and joining our program, she made a commitment to host a grief conference because she's a widow and she wanted to support widows. And within 90 days, she launched her conference. She's now like organizing or preparing to organize retreats. She's so on fire. And it was just a blessing to watch her from being a woman who she told me yesterday she used to hide. She did not want people to see her. And now she pushed herself to, be speaking at her own conference. And her heart is so fulfilled. And that's one thing that I just want to say as we close is that we don't want to leave here when we have this vision that God has given us and we just let it die with us. Like we want to live our life where it's poured out and fulfillment is possible. And I believe fulfillment happens when we use our gifts and we use our gifts to meet a need that we're passionate about. That is a purpose-driven life. And that's what I love helping women to experience.
Well, there you have it. Go to sisterstartyourministry.com to connect with with Reverend Jocelyn Jones. And do you help men as well, or do you kick them to the curb? If a guy wants to come and get your help, I know the focus is on women and you got ideal tool sets for them, but can anyone go?
Yeah, so men could actually read the book too to learn about starting their ministry. The coaching arm is just for women, but the trauma healing work is for men. So if men want to get certified in trauma healing, I work with men all the time.
Awesome. Well, there you have it. So anyone listening in, go to sisterstartyourministry.com, connect with Reverend Jocelyn Jones, and
Wade, could I add for the trauma healing side, the website is faithonthejourney.org. And we can probably have that in the show notes for those who are interested in the trauma healing side.
Yeah. Awesome. So I often have envisioned this as kind of a tennis match. My son is a freshman. He's doing tennis now. And we're standing on one side and God's on the other. And around our feet, it's littered with tennis balls because God keeps lobbing them gently over, wanting us to return to serve. And we rarely do, right? He's trying to make it easy, but we have all these reasons and all these excuses. You're helping us overcome that and start returning those serves because God wants us to succeed beyond our wildest dreams and our wildest imaginations.
I completely agree.
So now's the time to get started. sisterstartyourministry.com. And the other one was
faithonthejourney.org for any trauma healing resources that you need.
All right. My tagline is, you are created in the image of God and God loves his creation. Stay tuned for the sneak peek on what's coming up. And we'll get an invite out to Jocelyn to have her come back in a few months and tell us how things are going. Thank you for being with us today.
Thank you, Wade.
Next week on Created in the Image of God. Sunday, June 7th at 7 a.m. U.S. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Andrew Peterson, singer, songwriter, author, and founder of The Rabbit Room. He reflects on art, imagination, and the mystery of creating, and how music and storytelling can quietly point people toward Christ, from community and calling to the deeper beauty found in faith, hope, and the creative life. And then on Tuesday, June 9th at 8 p.m. Central Time, host Wade Franson interviews Peter Greer, author and CEO of Hope International. He explores the intersection of faith, business, and poverty alleviation, and how entrepreneurship can restore dignity and create lasting impact. From mission-driven leadership to rethinking charity through partnership, justice, and sustainable change. Join us live this week, Tuesday and Sunday,